Late night hikers. What is the creepiest thing you have seen while hiking? Not so much hiking as walking home after work one night a lot of years ago. I normally got off around 7 p.m. and my walks home were uneventful. However, this night I covered a half shift for someone and worked until 11 p.m. There was a trail behind some train tracks I would take home to avoid walking beside traffic and whatnot. I came to realize that night those trails were a lot different at 11 p.m. than they were at 7 p.m. I happened across a guy who was laying by his bike moaning in pain. It didn't sound like real moaning, more like a kid's fake "I have a tummy ache and can't go to school" moan. I also noticed his bike was standing up on its kickstand. It didn't make sense to me he would set his bike up properly only to fall to the ground in pain. He saw me and called out to me for help, but I kept walking and turned to make my way back up towards the street. As I turn, I suddenly hear some shuffling around, and the previously hurt gentleman yells at me, "I'm gonna kill you, motherfucker." He hops on his bike and starts rushing towards me. At this point, I'm most of the way up the incline going towards the railroad tracks that ran parallel to the street. I haul ass up there, and as I get over the tracks, my would-be assailant proceeds to hit the tracks with his front tire and flips over his handlebars, hitting the ground hard. He is now moaning in pain for real and makes genuine calls for help. I used a payphone at a gas station to call the cops and explain what happened. They get there and the officer explains to me this guy's a village idiot who does this shit to rob people, and it's not the first time they had to pick his ass up after he biffed on a bike trying to rob someone. I told the officer he threatened to kill me and he laughed. Dude wasn't even armed and apparently has had his ass kicked more times than he can count using that little line of his. My repost from a different askreddit post a while ago. Wasn't so much hiking, but it was late at night. I was walking around my neighborhood alone once, enjoying the night air and watching the stars. There was this little pond near my house with a wooded area that had trees, a bench and a rope swing that went out over the water. I sat down on the bench to look at the stars and I heard some rustling off to my right, towards the trees. Bears were not uncommon where I'm from, so I took out my flashlight and shone it around over there. I didn't see anything. It freaked me out, so I kept my flashlight on and my senses aware, but I stayed on the bench to mull over my thoughts and watch the sky some more. I don't know why I did that, cause that's typical horror movie shit. Anyway, a few minutes pass and I hear nothing more, so I lean back into the bench and start to relax a bit. I'm staring up at the sky with my flashlight pointed downwards so as not to create any light pollution when I notice something in the tree in my peripheral vision. I couldn't tell what it was, but the branch was swaying slightly and the rustling noise was back too. I immediately sat up and stared at it, but hadn't shown my flashlight at it yet in case of pissing off some huge bird or something else. I don't think I've ever been that scared. I remember my heart was beating so fast and I could taste blood. I stared at it for what seemed like forever and it slowly stopped moving. But the shape was still there. Bears do climb trees sometimes, so I was hesitant to run away in case that's what it was. So I just kept staring at it. After a while I mustered up the little raisin-esque cahanese to shine my goddamn light at the tree. It was a man. A fucking man. In the tree. Crouched in the tree like some silent naked monkey. He had no expression on his face, but his eyes were open really, really wide. When my light landed on him he started to move like he was going to come down, but I didn't stick around to see if he did. I jumped the bench and ran for the fucking hills. I ran to my house and around to the back door and locked myself in without looking back once. I went around and made sure every window and door was locked. I even checked the attic. I never go out alone anymore. Edit. I did call the cops, but they didn't find him and nothing came from it. I was hella paranoid for months after that and started carrying paquettes and/or pepper spray whenever I went out at night, even if I wasn't alone. Be safe, my dudes. Edit 2. Fixed opposing tenses. Edit 3. Thanks to all the lovely lads in the comments, I've concluded that this was, in fact, a crackhead, and I happened to just be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Still don't recommend going out alone or unarmed at night, though. Be safe, please. It wasn't what I saw nothing out of the ordinary. However, my dog got very agitated around a certain part of a trail and alternated between barking and snarling and hiding behind my legs. It creeped me out enough that we hurried out of there fast. I go hiking in the woods that permeate my town, sometimes so late that I get to see the sun rise out there. The strangest thing I ever saw was what I could only describe as a shanty town was built up seemingly overnight deep into the woods. Simple little hovels made of scrap metal and bed sheets and a small fire pit that someone had made out of an old tire, with the fire still burning. But that wasn't the weird part. The weird part was that this was well past midnight when I found this place, and it was quiet as a grave. There was no one there. Someone made the trouble of getting a fire going and then left it. From the look of it, this place could hold about a dozen or so people, and yet there was nothing there but the fire they abandoned and whatever possessions they had left in the shanties. When my now wife and I first started dating, we would take long walks through our very small town after I got off work at 11 p.m. We would wander through the cemetery, down little country roads, everywhere. But our favorite area was a large field where the stars were incredible. One night we were watching a small meteor shower and heard all kinds of loud grunting and ruckus coming from a tree line. We had nowhere to go and we're starting to get concerned. A large angry buck came out, stared at us, and then quietly walked away. I don't think we breathed for several minutes. I was convinced he was coming at us and there was no way to outrun him. We didn't go back there for a few days. A couple coyotes eating dead snakes in the middle of the trail. Usually, it's what I hear. Large, fallen branches snapping just out of sight of my headlamp. Or waking up an hour later and hearing steps and leaves rustling, but too exhausted and fearful to inspect or want to know, probably nothing important anyway. One time I returned to my car after a late night hike with friends, and my SUV was covered in foot hand paw prints. They were just so large and even dragged a little in the dust. It was on near a large military base in the mountains. I think some local enlisted may have made them to scare us. But it was just so well done. Pretty scary for all of us because it's what you'd imagine the Blair Witch would do. No animal did it. It was in the summer around dusk and I was camping at a remote campground with my dad. There was a lake right next to the grounds, and my dad and I would trailblaze through the forest right next to the lake because if you went far enough there was a really pretty waterfall. A few strange things happened on this hike. We found a slash pile that had a little kid's shoe on top. When we came to a small clearing, my dad had to take a leak to he faced one side of the clearing and I faced the other, and we both clearly heard a child say, "I'm over here." My dad thought it was me, and when he realized it wasn't, we spent half an hour looking for someone, but we found nobody. After that, we gave up on going to the waterfall and started to make our way back to camp, but there were clear sounds of something following us, twigs snapping, bushes shaking. We haven't been camping there since. Years ago, before we got married, my wife and I went to a local state park with a picnic and a hammock. We set the hammock up in the woods, enjoyed our picnic, then fell asleep together in the hammock. I was abruptly awakened by my wife. She motioned for me to be quiet. The sun had set, there was still a hint of light in the sky, but we couldn't see anything meaningful in the woods. My wife beckoned me to listen. Complete silence. Then, the snap of a branch in the distance. More silence. We were both suddenly very on edge. We whispered to one another, trying to figure out if someone was sneaking up on us. The silence was broken again. Another branch, same direction but closer. Then, from another direction, a momentary crunch of leaves. Now, we were terrified. We both had pickaxes on us, small but better than nothing. We also had a flashlight. We drew our knives and deliberated whether whatever was out there knew our location. We decided to keep the light off, lest we give away our exact location. Maybe we could run for the car? More steps, in rapid succession, coming directly toward us, then silence again. My wife had enough. "We know you fuckers are out there," she yelled. Silence for an eternity, and then another crunch of leaves. We had enough. We prepared ourselves as best we could for a fight, then shined the flashlight into the darkness, toward the last noise we had heard. 3 deer scampered away, into the darkness. We sheepishly gathered our things and left without incident. Done tons of miles by headlamp. Creepiest thing I ever saw was just deer's eyes reflecting at me out of the darkness. Spooked tons of skunks, bears, and other animals. And the damn quail that wait until you are right on top of them and then all freak out at once. Got woken up miles into the backcountry once by what I thought was a car horn. But it was just a flock of geese flying overhead, and walking through a cattle herd in the dark can be freaky. Especially if you don't realize you are walking through a cattle herd. I go out for walks very late at night fairly often, so I've seen a few things. The creepiest though happened about 2 months ago. I left the house around 1:30 a.m., and it started off as a normal walk. I wandered around the town till about 2 a.m. when I decided to go home. I was walking back the route I had came when I noticed a black van meander down the street. Didn't really pay too much attention to it though, at first. I did pay attention though when I saw it slowly drive by me for a second time. I wasn't entirely sure it was the same van though, so I just continued walking. But this time I kept an eye out. And lo and fucking behold, about 10 minutes later, the same damn black van came down the street again. This time I knew for sure because it didn't have license plates. Now I was fairly scared, so I picked my pace up a little bit. When the van came around again this time, it stopped in the middle of the road a few houses in front of me. I stopped, turned around, and booked it back in the other direction. I made a few turns onto different roads and then ran right into someone's yard. I waited behind their fence, and the same fucking van came down the street. I assume that when they couldn't find me, they finally decided to fuck off. But I waited in that yard for about 20 minutes before I ran back to my house and practically threw myself through my bedroom window. A few friends and I went on an overnight hike in the Rockies behind our little town a few years back when I was in HS. Our camping site was pretty far up there and it was getting dark. The spot we were at was nestled in a grove of trees secluded from the wind and elements, so we decided to stop there for the night. The four of us built a little fire and ate dinner, then just talked for a few hours. Then all of the sudden my friend leaps forward and douses the fire with our emergency water, plunging us into complete darkness. Needless to say, the rest of us were pretty pissed as there was no reason for him to do this. He quickly shushes us, and we realize he is absolutely terrified. Like so scared he couldn't even speak or move. The rest of us managed to get a few words out of him, and he tells us to look up on the ridge where we should have been camping at. It was pretty far up, so it was kind of hard to see at first, but that sight will haunt me for the rest of my life. There was a fire, a big one, like a bonfire sort of thing. Around the fire were several figures moving in a slow circle. They were humanoid but not quite, and they had arms and legs like people, but something just seemed different about them that I can't really explain. Almost like the limbs were too long and skinny or something, but maybe not. Anyway, these figures just moved around the fire in a really slow circle over and over again. My one friend claims he could hear them singing something, but I don't remember anything. Importantly, there was one standing off to the side a little ways, leaning with his arm on a tree branch above his head. It really creeped us out, but we were able to sleep it off. We figured it was a scout troop having a camp or something. Morning came and we finished off our hike to the peak, and on our way down we passed the place we saw the figures and decided to check out the camp. It was completely deserted. It was obvious that there had been a fire and there were footprints everywhere. Inside the fire pit was a small mound of charred animal bones, probably chipmunk, and a pile of 4 or 5 rodent skulls that had been burned. Creepy, right? Then we look over at where the one figure was standing. Blood. Not a lot, but enough to be of concern or anything, but enough to be creepy. Then we see the tree branch he was casually leaning against. It was well over any of our heads, and I'm over 6 foot. That would mean that in order for the figure to lean against it like he would need to be at least 7 feet tall. Needless to say, we got off that mountain very fast, and I have never been up there again. We called the Fish and Wildlife Rangers and told them what we saw. They said it was probably just a bunch of kids messing around and not to worry about it. It might have been just that, and we let our imaginations run wild, but all 4 of us swear to this day we all saw the same thing, and it didn't look like a bunch of kids in the dark. I don't believe in ghosts or the supernatural, but those mountains still scare the shit out of me, and I will never go back there again. Don't believe me if you don't want to, but there is something out there, ghost or dumb kids, I'm not going near it. I once shined my headlamp on a man masturbating next to a juniper tree when I was going out for a pooper by the juniper tree. I drove to a park to go hiking at night in the mountains, so safe I know, and I hadn't even turned off my car, and I already feel like I'm being watched. There weren't any cars around, so I thought maybe it was just me being paranoid for some reason. But for some reason I look to my right and I see this weird-looking humanoid shape on top of the little bump hill about 50 feet away. At first eye though, it was a weirdly shaped tree until I saw the arms move, no wind at all. So now I know there's a person staring at my car trying not to move, for what I assume is for me to get out of my car and leave to a more secluded area as we were next to the road. Of course I left. I don't go hiking at night in that particular park anymore. Not on a trail, but walking my dog late at night. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning, my dog rang her bell, and I begrudgingly got up to take her outside. When she wants to pee in the middle of the night I don't take her very far, just in our side yard. I took a flashlight with me in case she decided to poo so I could pick it up. I'm standing there waiting for her to do her thing. She is doing the doggy walk in a circle thing. Then all of a sudden the dog gets spooked and whips around. Out of the corner of my eye I see this chick just standing there. I didn't see her walk up, I didn't hear her walk up, I just see her standing there super still. Based on her position, she had to have come from between my house and my neighbor's house. Which is odd, because behind our houses back up to a green belt. It is probably 40 degrees outside, and this lady, about 20, is in super short shorts and a t-shirt. I looked at her, told her she scared me, and she mumbled something like, "Nice night, what are you up to?" Standing there holding the leash with my dog, I said, "I'm walking my dog." Then she said, cool, do you know how to get into my house?" I locked myself out. Pointing to my neighbor's house now, I'm a good American, I know my neighbors, and this wasn't my neighbor, who is a single 30-year-old female. She hangs out with my wife, so I know her really well. So I asked her, "That house?" Pointing directly at my neighbor's house. She nodded. I said, "You don't live there, I know who lives there." She just scoffed and wandered her way into my backyard. I followed her, said, "What the hell are you doing?" She then took off running, scaled my fence, which item of note, it isn't an easy fence to scale. It is a deer fence. It is a see-through fence that goes up 3 feet with cattle gate, then the top of the fence is stainless steel wire that runs horizontally. It is the type of thing that, if you weren't expecting it, you'd easily trip over as it is extremely hard to see and not very common. Anyways, she scales the fence and ran away into the green belt. I always have a pocket knife on me and was fortunate enough to have my unfortunately useless dog, so I looked around my house, neighbor's house for other people, shined my light in the green belt and nothing. I have no idea how she wound up back there. What she was doing. What she intended to do, but she scared the ever-living shit out of me. Edit. Green belt unincorporated land, zone to never have anything built on it. I.e. backing up to the edge of a forest, cliff, etc. In my case it was a wooded area for about a half a mile of nothing. Rattlesnakes, deer, mongooses, etc. live in that green belt. This wasn't on a hike, and this is pretty tame compared to some of these stories, but it's a bit similar. Back in our old place, one night my girlfriend and I were walking our dogs around the neighborhood. She's a lot smaller, so I was walking 2 of the dogs, and she was walking one, who was a former service dog. He was a real gentle dog, albeit a bit older. Other than snatching the ball away from the others during fetch, he'd never shown a bit of aggression. I walk a bit ahead of my girlfriend because of the 2 dogs pulling pretty hard on me, but not too far, maybe 10 or 15 feet ahead, but around a corner. As I found out later, she'd slowed down in part because she'd noticed someone nearby acting strangely, scoping out a house I think. When he spotted her, he said hi and she responded in kind, asked how he was. Before he could answer, the dog she was walking started to growl and she apologized, commenting that he was a guard dog. The guy looked at her and said, "Well, he's doing a good job tonight." She was pretty spooked and hurried to catch up to me. We were more careful on nighttime walks from then on. It was around midnight in a clearing for picnics in a large park that lots of people hike through, pitch black, no one around. I was with my boyfriend at the time. We got pretty frisky at one of the picnic tables, and I'm facing a river which is sort of illuminated from the moonlight. He's facing the solid black tree line. We're trying to have a good time, and he becomes completely still and in a low voice says there's a man coming towards us. As I turn my head, see only a white t-shirt approaching us at a brisk walking pace from the trees, and that's all I needed to see. I ran, knowing my BF would catch up. He did. I was never down for midnight forest stuff again. Haha. Edit. The man in the white shirt probably got within 25 feet of us by the time I had my shit together enough to bolt. Still freaks me out. He said nothing, just walked very fast towards us. Neither of us looked back. A bear. It wasn't late night, but the sun was setting. A bunch of friends went up to a cliff diving spot that we knew. After a day of swimming and activities, a park ranger saw us and told us to follow a certain trail back to the parking lot because it's faster. This was a trail we haven't seen and we didn't take it up. We said fuck it and decided it was okay. After about 1.5 hours of hiking and being lost on the trail, we come to a clearing in the forest with no more trail. Just what was left and a shit ton of vegetation. No problem, turn around right? Now that was the first time I ever saw a bear full on in person. The first thing I thought about was how fucked it would be if we had to run and even worse, someone getting caught. We just saw it, backed up, and decided fuck it, better walk down the mountain than try to go around it. This isn't creepy, but it definitely spooked me. I went on a night hike about 12 years ago with a meetup group just to experience one. I knew no one there and I'm not one to make small talk. There were about 25 people there, and beforehand we met in a small cabin on the property where the organizer laid down the rules. This person was stern. We were to remain completely silent and listen to the night sounds. Keep up with the leader. It was certainly creepy, walking quickly and quietly through the dark woods with strangers at your back. I think the leader was too rigid, and no one seemed to enjoy the experience. As soon as I spotted my car, I got in it and left. I'm late to the party, but years ago some friends and I were going to have a campfire at a lake late at night with copious amounts of alcohol. When we got there, we had to drive around a barricade and one of the cars got stuck in the mud. While trying to get it unstuck, I looked around and made a joke about how we were definitely in the beginning of a horror movie. We all laugh about it. We get the car out and continue to the lake, get all set up, fire is going, music is playing, drinks are flowing, we are having a great time. All of a sudden some random fucking guy comes walking out of the woods with a beer. I get nervous, everyone else tells me I'm being paranoid since I watch a lot of scary movies. They invite him to join us, he ends up sitting next to me, but a few feet away. I go to grab another beer from the cooler, see the hatchet that someone brought, and I decide I'm going to hold on to it. I sit back down and this random guy makes some comment about he can see my jugular and wants to bite it. I'm ready to piece TF out, but I of course didn't drive. A little while later he makes a comment about he should have brought his chainsaw. I'm completely alone and thinking this is going to end badly. I move across the fire and closer to the cooler and one of my friends. I set the hatchet next to me, try to ignore the guy and enjoy my night. Fast forward a bit and the guy is making more weird comments, so I reach for the hatchet. It's gone. I start glancing around, discreetly at first, when the guy smiles at me from across the fire and goes looking for this? And holds up the hatchet. I said, fuck all of this, I'm leaving and managed to get one of my friends to leave. The next day everyone said that nothing more happened, but as someone who has seen a lot of movies, I wasn't taking any chances. I'm white, but I'm not laugh off a crazy guy with a hatchet white. This wasn't in the woods, but a long urban hike back to my friend's house from a concert. It was late and we decided to take a shortcut through a construction site because we were tired. Because all the streets around the construction site were closed, it was completely empty, just the two of us in the South Loop area of Chicago. We're crossing this small bridge and just chatting away about what we liked the most about the show. I was looking at him and then turned my head forward and I'm face to face with what looks like a zombie rat. Someone had taken a mummified rat or squirrel or something and used wire to position it like it was pouncing mid-air at your face. Scared the fuck out of me. Here is a picture I snapped of it with my shitty phone. https://i.imgur.com/bwqqn.jpg. The combination of the abandoned construction site and the zombie rat creeped both of us out and we bolted down the street until we hit a busy intersection with other people driving. While it did not happen during the hike, rather the camping, it was still the creepiest thing I've experienced out there. Was working at a summer camp for kids and we went on an overnight outing. Had a cougar circle our camp from around 11 p.m. to roughly 5 a.m. It was crying out, hoping one of us would separate from the group. I stayed up all night with bear spray and a hatchet, keeping an eye on it with the other staff. I walk at night in my rural area regularly. I've encountered black bears, coyotes, bobcats, angry deer, and everything on down, with no real concern. But the creepiest encounter was a little black pickup truck with rainbow and unicorn stickers. Bubblegum pop music blaring, and it smelled like cotton candy when it passed me. First time it passed me, it swerved to hit me. I jumped out of the way easily. I thought nothing of it really, just figured they were startled by seeing me at night with my reflective gear. The truck circled back and comes at me again. I saw it coming this time and grabbed my dog up just in time to jump into a ditch. I heard little girl laughter, high-pitched and maniacal. The tiny truck circled back for a third go at me, but by then I was hiding in my neighbor's shrubbery. I watched it slowly drive down the road, hearing giggling as it passed me. Fortunately it kept on going and I made it home just fine. 2 cubs and no mother. In other words, I had probably come between them. Hiking alone around midnight in the woods, I'm going through a clearing and to my right, around a football throwing distance away, I see at least 5 pairs of eyes about my height staring at me. I froze and just stared, not being able to make out any shapes with my headlamp on a low enough setting, so it was only bright enough to make their eyes glow. They were stepping around a little, and the grass rustling made me think it was a group of hikers hanging out in the dark for some reason. This all happened fast in the span of like 5 to 10 seconds. All of a sudden they started bouncing toward me fast, raising high up and down, higher than my head. As they crossed my path, I flashed my headlamp at them and saw it was a family of deer leaping through the grass to get away from me. Even then it was a little scary because I could feel the air on my face as they rushed close by. Probably too late for this thread, but I love telling this story, so here we go. When I was very little, like 5 or 6, my dad used to take me on all sorts of adventures through nature, especially when we owned a little cottage up in the Scottish Highlands. Now, my dad is sort of a Yorkshire lad type and very spry, despite his being about 55 at the time, and on this particular occasion had decided we were going to go hiking way up into the cliffs. I was quite happy with this development as it meant a piggyback ride for at least 90% of the difficult bits. This was a proper trek. He wanted to get to one of the highest bluffs so we could have an amazing 360-degree view of the gorgeous meadows and some sparkling sea. But after we reached the top plains, where it's all short, wind-whipped grass and you can see for miles, he suddenly turned very still and very quiet. When you're small, your parents are God, so seeing your dad look frightened is scarier than anything your own mind can come up with, so I was pulling on his arm and going, "What? My mum is epileptic, and I saw her fits when I was a kid, so I thought it was happening to him too, or something similar, and I wouldn't know what to do because we're up on this huge cliff and no one is around," when just as fast as he started it, he snapped out of it, lifted me right up, and just started walking away without saying anything. Over his shoulder, I could see a big pale yellow object stuck into the ground like an obelisk. I know now that it was a refrigerator. When I was older and I asked my dad about it, he stiffened up and told me that when he was a boy in the 50s, he and his little friends had found an old-style fridge in the woods, and being little boys, they opened it. Well, of course, they had found a body, another child, who by whichever means had found themselves in the fridge and unable to get out. My dad has never mentioned a gender, which leads me to believe he either witnessed a very decomposed or skeletonized individual, but I can't ask him. Remember that episode of The Simpsons where they unlock Homer's PTSD, and it turns out he found a dead body when he was a teenager? My dad grew increasingly uncomfortable the first time we saw that episode and had excused himself to the kitchen before the ending. My dad has seen some gnarly shit, but for whatever reason he will not discuss anything further about this dead child in the fridge, only that it happened. So when he explained, I assumed it was the trauma, and I said something like, "Oh, that's awful, so when you saw the fridge up there, it brought up the old memories." And he honestly looked at me like I was an idiot. I'll never forget it. "No, Amy," he said in a very low tone, "it's because it was the same fridge." Man popped out of nowhere 5 feet in front of me last night around 11. It was my own shadow bouncing off a sign. Went to northern Michigan to try and photograph the stars. First night was cloudy, so I drove off at 11:30 p.m. On the way home there was a clearing, so I stopped to see if the clouds were still covering in that area, which they were. I was out for about a minute just looking. I get back in my car and turn my music back on, look up, and in the headlights there's a wolf walking across the road. Creeped me out. One night I saw a big dead dog. It was the biggest husky I've ever seen, just lying on the side of the road. There was no blood, and it wasn't emaciated either, so I could only wonder what the cause of death was. What freaked me out was how it was just laying in the middle of the road. It didn't look real. On another night I walked past a smaller dog on a separate trail that had just been hit or something. There was a gash in its body that was spraying blood like a fire hose, and it was flopping around like a fish on dry land. One of the hardest things I've ever had to stomach. 2 a.m. with a friend through a park, bats flying around and boom, one of them slaps the shit out of my friend's face. My mom decided to take us on a late night hike. She claims she saw a mountain lion, and she made us run the fastest we've ever ran in our little lives. I think she actually saw a piece of shrub. It was really scary at the time. Not hiking so much as car camping, but we were way the fuck out there in the middle of nowhere on BLM land in Colorado. We drove for an hour and a half down a Forest Service road and didn't see another soul. You could see headlights and hear cars from miles away from our campsite. It's not like somebody could have snuck up unnoticed. We had 3 cars with us and 8 people. Just got done eating dinner, cleaned up, it was getting dark, so we went back to the cars real quick before hitting our tents for the night. Somebody had slashed the front right tire on each of the 3 cars with what appeared to be a box cutter. Everyone thought it was a prank, but it became very apparent very quickly that it wasn't. All of us were beyond spooked, like panicking, scary to watch spooked. We all had spares, and one dude had a gun, so we threw on our donuts while that guy literally guarded us and got the hell out of there. I still have nightmares about it sometimes. Just knowing there was some person, probably watching us, maybe wanting to harm us, makes me feel physically ill to this day.